That's why we raise so many messed up adults today. They're not prepared for the real world when they enter it. That's why they'd rather live in their parents' basement and not have to hassle with the struggle of working for someone and meeting their boss's expectations. You see, if you want to raise a great adult, you got to be a courageous parent. So do the thing that's so important. Develop the courageous mindset. Welcome to the Salty Pastor Podcast. It is our desire and goal here to coach you up in your faith. And before we get started today, I just want to let you know that the Salty Pastor ecosystem has actually been growing. And I have some content creators, people that are teachers and educators that have actually been approaching me and asking about the possibility of future partnerships in developing very targeted, specific style teaching and education for people to answer very practical questions in their life. And I go, well, that's what Salty Pastor is all about. We're about helping people in every single daily life with sources that they can actually trust. It's not some fly-by-night, new trendy cultural thing, but it's tried and true. It's based on research as well as timeless revelatory truth. So very excited about that. Also, the books that I've written, I think I have up to 4 books now, but we are slowly getting them all transitioned over with new editions to the new kind of Salty Pastor Amazon store. And the first one is out. It's called How to Read and Understand the Bible. And it's just a wonderful book. You want to get started in your faith and how come you can trust the Bible as a library and where to start reading it. It's just a great introduction. It's a great gift to give to people who are like, well, I don't know anything about this Christianity. I've been to church. I don't even know where to start reading the Bible. That's what this book was written for. So people who are curious, they want to know, and it's written from my style, and that is I tell you what all the other sacred texts are that are out there, and you get to compare them for yourself so you can make up your own mind. What we're going to be doing is, if you're a supporter of the ministry, we're going to be sending you a free copy of the latest edition of How to Read and Understand the Bible. So if you're a supporter and you're listening today, I just want you to know that gift is coming your way. Now, I believe that the reason why this podcast ecosystem is growing is because of 3 basic reasons. Number 1, people really want to find out the answers to some of the biggest questions of their life. They are interested in growing their faith. They realize that we have a soul, and my soul thirsts for something. They're not interested in being told what to believe or what to do. They're interested in us thinking for themselves. They want to think through the deeper questions for their own sake in order to find their own fulfilling answers. So in other words, it's kind of like what people say, you got to do the work. And so the Salty Pastor Podcast is not here to spoon-fed people on what to believe. What it is here's what it teaches, here's the facts of what it says, here's the facts that support the veracity or truthfulness or authenticity of it, here's how people in that culture would have understood it. And then that allows you to decide for yourself, wow, does this really resonate with me? Does it feed my soul? Does it help me understand my faith in Jesus Christ better or not? The second thing, I think, is the reason why the Salty Pastor ecosystem is growing is because people are not as arrogant as some of the past younger generations in America were. They don't believe, the new generations, particularly Gen Z, I think it's really interesting. They don't believe that our founding fathers were idiots, but some of the greatest intellectuals in Western civilization, and which they were. They don't have a bigotry towards our ancestors. It's really interesting. In the 60s, that generation, and then in the 70s and 80s, that generation, the 90s, and then up to about 2005, it seems that those generations, whether they were taught or enculturated this way, they have a tremendous bigotry towards ancestors and philosophers of old and great thinkers of the past. Whereas the newest generation, this Gen Z, have a much deeper respect, and they're not as arrogant. And so they want to know. They want to know What were our founding fathers thinking, and what did they base their ideas on? Where did they come from? Why do so many people in our society think the way they do today? Those ideas just don't spring out of nowhere. They come from somewhere, and somebody seeded them in the culture and then fanned the flames or watered those seeds, so to speak, in order to bring them to fruition. And that's what the Salty Pastor does, is it goes back, it shows where these things came from and what their intent was so people can make up their own mind. People who listen have a love of history and science because they know that the rational mind is critical to having a strong and vibrant faith. Finally, I think it's growing because people want challenging concepts to be broken down in ways that are more digestible, and then they're nutritious for their soul. And that's what I attempt to do. Now, one final note about the Salty Pastor, and that's simply this. The Salty Pastor is really good for people, for whatever reason, are not attending a local church. Now, there are lots of reasons why people are unable to actively attend a church. And I really want to say is, if you want to go back and listen to my series on guilt, is that you shouldn't feel guilty about that. For instance, health. People are unable to physically attend because of a chronic health condition. 45 years ago when I started out, these people were called shut-ins. That means they were shut in and unable to leave their home. And so what happens is we as pastors, when I was a very, very young pastor starting out, I would go and visit people who were shut-ins. Another reason why people can't attend a local church and be highly involved is because their job and career. Lots of people work on the weekends, or they have to travel for their job, and that makes it difficult to have a consistent attendance and involvement at a local church. You know, it's really important, this is a side note, and I'm not making a judgment good or bad, I'm just stating the facts, and that is the model of the local church today is built around the lifestyle of couples with young children. It's not good or bad, it just is. And so if you're not a young couple with children, you go to a church and they'll say, well, our target group is, young couples with children. They state that openly. And so their entire model is built around that. There's nothing wrong with that. I think it's great. But the issue today is that over 50% of the population is not young, and they're not young couples with children. And so the Salty Pastor is a perfect substitute, or not a substitute, but it's a perfect option for people who are in a different stage of life. Finally, people have bad experiences all the time. You go to church, it starts to grow, and then there are people who come in and they're disagreeable, they're unethical, they're divisive. And who needs that in their life when they're just trying to grow their faith? Community is important, but toxic community is the worst. Toxic community is the worst. And it's an issue today. And all too often, local churches are breeding grounds for toxic community. Therefore, that's why I'm building this ministry for the sole purpose of helping people grow in their faith, regardless of the challenges they may face. The key is to not let any of these challenges stop you from doing what you know you can do and what you can participate in when it comes to your faith. And in the end, it's important to remember that your faith and your faith alone is what's important in this journey through life. So that's a little bit of why we're doing it. And I like to kind of just remind us that every month, okay? Now, we've been talking about developing the championship mindset. And here's what we've really discovered so far. I call these the first principles. There's only 3 right now, but we'll dig into more and add more as we go on throughout the year. Number 1, mature people who are clear thinkers set realistic expectations. Mature people who are clear thinkers, critical thinkers, set realistic expectations. Therefore, they start with a simple question. What does God intend for my faith to produce in me? What does God expect my faith will transform me into, or what will I become? For instance, a critical thinker tends to be healthier and in better shape on average. Now, why is that? Well, because they're more disciplined, right? Now, some people will say, well, that's because they have more willpower, and they have more willpower than I. But that's false. That's not true. Critical thinkers don't have more willpower than you do, and they're not really that more disciplined than anyone else, but they are able to exercise discipline more frequently. Because what if they have the same level of willpower that you do? The difference is between you and them is they have realistic expectations. That's what allows them to exercise discipline more consistently. See, they choose an exercise regimen that will produce realistic results. Therefore, if they don't lose 50 pounds in the first week, they don't get discouraged and quit. Because they're clear thinkers, they don't have to take radical steps in order to change their outcome. This results in a much higher rate of success. So what clear thinkers do, people who think for themselves, critical thinkers do, is they set realistic expectations. And so that's why we started with the question, what is my faith supposed to produce in me? What is it? And so the more they think about that question, the more realistic their faith journey becomes aligned with what God is doing in them, okay? So ask yourself, what expectations do I have about my faith? Do I have a biblical expectation about what my faith is supposed to produce, or do I have a material world expectation? In other words, do I expect my faith to just simply make my life easier or more convenient? Or do I expect my faith to develop a strength, a confidence, a courage in me that I never had before? Do I have what it takes to be an overcomer, no matter what life throws at me? Can I overcome that? Do I have a expectation that my faith is going to develop in me a victorious mindset? And the New Testament specifically teaches this over and over and over again, that your faith is intended, beyond a shadow of a doubt, to produce in you a victorious mindset. Now, the second thing I think is on the list of first principles is this. Is it impossible or possible to think victoriously if you don't deal with guilt? And what I would say is the answer to that question is no. It is not possible to think victoriously, to develop a victorious mindset, if you never effectively deal with emotional guilt. The number one emotional trap that undermines your capacity to think and live like a Christian champion in this world is the trap of emotional guilt. The New Testament overwhelmingly teaches that Jesus resolved our standing or our position of being guilty. So it says that when he came and he redeemed us, and when we place our faith in him, he eradicates our standing of guilt. And that's what it means when Jesus says that the Son of Man came to give his life a ransom, which is a payment of debt, right? A ransom for many. So we were bought back by Jesus. And that's why Paul says in Romans 8, verses 1 and 2, therefore there is now no condemnation. In other words, there's no guilt accusation that can stand for those who are in Christ Jesus. For the law of the Spirit of life in Christ Jesus has set you free from the law of sin and death. So you have to realize that your standing of guilt has been removed, and therefore you must learn the tools to effectively deal with the emotional guilt that can trap you from developing and overcoming successful championship mindset as you follow Jesus. Finally, we're on courage right now. And courage is the building block on which the championship mindset is developed, right? The New Testament is filled with teaching on courage. Over and over again, you see its theme throughout not only the Gospels, but also stories recorded in the book of Acts. And then it is mentioned again and again in the various letters that were written that make up the New Testament. And one of the connections that you start to see as you're reading the New Testament in these letters is that all the virtues that your life is supposed to produce as you follow Jesus, they're called fruits of the Spirit. They're listed in Galatians chapter 5. Things like love, joy, patience, peace, kindness, mercy, perseverance. All of these things are established. They are experienced, they are executed, right, on the stepping stone of courage. So courage is the beginning point in order for all of these things to manifest in your life. Let's listen to some passages, okay? I want to start with 1 Corinthians chapter 12, beginning with verse 7. Okay? Now what Paul's doing here is he's telling the Corinthians, hey, I've had visions about God, and your visions that you have, because there was a situation going on in the church where people were saying, well, I had a vision from God, and this is what he told me to do. And Paul's saying, yeah, okay, that's ridiculous, because it doesn't match up with true and authentic faith. And he says, what real visions from God do is they produce humility in you, not an opportunity to lord over other people. And so listen to what he says. Now, because of the surpassing greatness of the visions or revelations that I had, for this reason, to keep me from exalting myself, there was given me a thorn in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to buffet me, to keep me from exalting myself. Concerning this, I asked the Lord 3 times that it would depart from me. And he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for power or strength, courage, is perfected in weakness. Most gladly, therefore, I will rather boast about my weaknesses, that the power of Christ may dwell in me. Therefore, I am well content with the weaknesses, with insults, with distresses, with persecutions, with difficulties, for Christ's sake. For when I am weak, then I am strong. See, Paul is teaching that courage arises not from your personal strength, but from the grace that God bestows upon you. See, people here in Corinth were going around and saying, hey, I have this vision from God, and they would exalt themselves over other people. And he says, yeah, that's not the intent, right? I had a bad situation last year in my life, and a person who I thought was a Christian brother was making all these accusations against me, which turned out to be false, and we can prove that they are all false. And in one conversation that I had with him, he's pointing his finger at me, and he said, you're trying to trade on my good name. And I just thought about that and said, what an absurd anti-Christian thing to say. That, to try to say, I should be respected and listened to because I'm better than everybody else. I just thought, that's just absurd. Paul says the exact opposite. He says, you want to have courage, you want to have strength in your life, then listen to this. Exult in your weakness. Why? Because courage doesn't come from you. It comes from the grace of God. In James, if you flip back to James, it's really interesting. In chapter 1, he says this, consider it all joy, my brethren, when you encounter various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces endurance. And let endurance have its perfect result, that you be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. It's really interesting, and that is that James exhorts followers of Christ to consider it pure joy when you have trials and tribulations in your life. Even though suffering is unpleasant, it refines faith to maturity. That gives you courage. And what that is this is what I love about learning to think for yourself. It sets your brain's expectations properly. What you're doing, you're saying, I don't expect God to make my life easier. I expect him to turn me into a warrior, a person of power and strength that can stand strong in the face of evil. That's what I want as a man to become. And I believe that's what you should want. That's why if you are a person who thinks for themselves and is doing the work to develop their own faith, you are a rarity. It's difficult sometimes to be a part of Christian groups that are more interested in just being soft or being easy. They're more interested in being sheep than they are being sheepdogs. And that is a tough pill for a lot of men to swallow. And that's why men are not attracted or not attending the average churches in America today, because they're there celebrating the vibe of feminism, not the vibe of masculinity. And this is the reason why, is because they're not developing a championship mindset of overcoming, which is one of strength and courageous thinking. Now, if you go back to chapter 1 of 2 Timothy, he says something really interesting about courage. He goes, I thank God, whom I serve with a clear conscience. You remember how I was talking last week about the importance of a conscience that's not foggy when it comes to developing a courageous mindset? Notice Paul's referring to that to Timothy. He says, I serve with a clear conscience, the way my forefathers did, as I constantly remember you in my prayers night and day, longing to see you, even as I recall your tears, so that I may be filled with joy. So clear conscience is connected to joy, and you experience joy when you live courageously. He goes, I am mindful of your sincere faith within you, which first dwelt in your grandmother Lois and in your mother Eunice, and I am sure that it is in you as well. So this goes again to show you that the power of a faith of women, mothers, and grandmothers has a huge impact on their sons, because that's what Paul is extolling, or he's giving a shout out to at this point. Then listen to what he says. And for this reason I remind you to kindle afresh the gift of God, which is in you through the laying on of my hands. For God did not give us a spirit of timidity, but of power and love and discipline. Okay, you want something salty? Well, I want to show you something salty, okay? This is a term. It's called pusillanimous, okay? And what does it mean? It means people who show a lack of courage or determination. They are timid. What does Paul say right here? God has not given you a spirit of timidity, but of power and love and discipline. So no one can pronounce this word very well, pusillanimous. And so what everybody does in today's world is they shorten it. This is why guys say, stop being a pussy. That's where it comes from. Now that is salty, and you can throw that down on some people and see what happens. So the goal of your faith is not to produce you into a pusillanimous person. So don't be a pussy, okay? Let's look back to Acts chapter 4, verses 13 through 20. Now what happened is John and Peter are arrested by the Sanhedrin. They're brought before the council, the high priest, and they basically are kind of threatening them. And this is what it says. Now they observed the confidence of Peter and John, and they understood that they were uneducated and untrained men, and they were marveling and began to recognize them as having been with Jesus. And seeing the man who had been healed standing with them, they had nothing to say in reply. But when they had ordered them to go outside of the council, they began to confer with one another, saying, what will we do with these men? The fact that a noteworthy miracle has taken place through them is apparent to all who live in Jerusalem. We can't deny that. But in order that it may not spread any further among the people, let us warn them to speak no more of this man in this name. And so they summoned them, they commanded them to speak, not to speak or teach in the name of Jesus. And Peter and John answered and said to them, whether it is right in the sight of God to give heed to you rather than to God, you be the judge, because we cannot stop speaking what we have seen and heard. Peter and John, under threat, declared that they must speak what they have seen and heard. This is an unyielding truth central to courage, and that is you have to believe what you have seen with your own eyes of what Jesus has done in your life, okay? So if you have faith, my friend, if you believe in the depth of your soul that what you are devoted to, following, focusing on, makes a difference, that it makes a difference in your life, in your eternity, in your marriage, if you're single and searching, in your parenting, in your extended family, in your nation. If you believe your faith makes a difference in all of those things, then you must develop a courageous mindset. Take the time, take the energy, do the work to develop a courageous mindset, because it is the stepping stone. It is the foundational slab on which you leap forward into executing and experiencing all of these things that you believe. Without courage, you have faith with no fruit, because courage is the thing that produces the fruit of faith in your life. For instance, everyone wants love. When you hear the definition of authentic love in the New Testament, it resonates with the depth of your soul. It makes you thirsty for that kind of love. You think, wow, I want that type of love in my life. And yet it is so difficult to experience that love. Not only receive it, but to give it. So how do you move from dreaming about that, thirsting for that kind of love, right, to actually living and experiencing the love you desire in your life every single day? Courage. That's exactly right. You focus on developing a courageous mindset, then all of those things will start to pop up in your life. You know, you start thinking courageously, and when it comes to love, you're going to say, yeah, I can do that. And all of a sudden, boop, little piece of fruit pops up. You've developed courageous thinking in your life, and then an opportunity comes to love in the way Christ defined it. You do it. You don't wait. You don't second guess. You don't think. You don't go, what if? You just do it, and then boop, another piece of fruit pops up in your life. Courage is the key to experiencing that authentic love. And it counteracts the incentive of life. Because you know what incentive of life is in this world? The incentive is to love poorly. The incentive is to love selfishly or transactionally, trying to manipulate people to get what you want. The difference between love described in the New Testament and a self-centered, narcissistic, self-serving type of love is courage. So, take time to develop a courageous mindset. Everybody wants to raise great kids, right? Everybody wants to raise great kids. Right and wrong is really not that hard to understand or grasp. So why has the last couple of generations struggled with growing up? Frank Martin, the basketball coach at UMass, he was down at South Carolina at the Gamecocks, and he said this quote when he was down at South Carolina. He said, you know what makes me sick to my stomach? When I hear grown people say that kids have changed. Kids haven't changed. Kids don't know anything about anything. We've changed as adults. We demand less of kids. We expect less of kids. We make their lives easier instead of preparing them for what life is truly about. We're the ones that have changed. Blaming the kids is a cop-out. And when it comes to parenting, I couldn't agree more. Nobody has the courage to parent their children properly anymore. My life is an example. When I was little, I'd get disciplined by my dad. You know how he disciplined me? He'd take his leather belt off and he would stroke my behind with it. That's exactly what he'd do. And on occasion, he would say something. He would say, you know what, son, one day you realize this hurts me more than you. And I thought he was absolutely nuts saying that. I said, because I'm on the receiving end of this belt. How could it possibly hurt you more than it hurts me? There's no way you're getting a cramp in your arm by swinging that thing. So then I grew up, I got married and had kids of my own, and I learned exactly what he meant. You see, it's so much easier to just let your kids misbehave. Having to discipline my children when they were little and work the discipline plan took a lot of effort. And sometimes you're just so tired, you're exhausted from work and all the other stuff going on. I mean, kids wear you out. It's just much easier to want to be their friend instead of their parent. It's so much easier to parent your children out of an emotional center or emotional logic rather than a rational logic and what's the best thing to do. That's why we raise so many messed up adults today. They're not prepared for the real world when they enter it. That's why they'd rather live in their parents' basement and not have to hassle with the struggle of working for someone and meeting their boss's expectations. You see, if you want to raise a great adult, you got to be a courageous parent. So do the thing that's so important. Develop the courageous mindset. So here's what I want you to do this week. This is my challenge for you this week. I want you to think about how important it is to have courage in order to experience all of these things your soul desires, okay? Another way to phrase it would be like this. How would thinking courageously every single day for the next week make everything that you want in life come to fruition or actually happen? Now, if you'd like to go deeper on this, meditate on it more, grab the discussion questions, do them for yourself, or grab some friends and say, what in the world did you think about that Salty Pastor podcast? Boy, we need to break that down. Find where you agree, find where you disagree, because that, my friend, is how you grow. Because remember, it's how we think and our capacity to think for ourselves that make all the difference in the growing of our faith. Now, I would love for you to go over to our website, and I'd love for you to sign up for the Monday morning inspirational email that I send out to help you stay focused for the week, lift you up, and encourage you. I would also love for you to go to our YouTube channel, The Salty Pastor, and like and subscribe. Just like and subscribe. We're just over 300 subscribers, and I'd love that to continue to grow. As soon as we get over 1,000, it's really quite remarkable what the algorithm allows you to do. Finally, click on that donate button, because remember, this is 100% supported by the listeners. And I hope that you're finding that each and every week we are helping you grow in your faith, because what you believe is one of the most important things about you.